Lieutenant Vera Volkov felt the jungle's damp breath on her skin, thick and suffocating. It was the 24th hour of the patrol, a deep penetration mission into contested territory where the terrain was as hostile as the enemy forces. Her pack weighed 30 kilograms, each gram a cruel joke played by physics on an exhausted body. The constant rhythmic pounding of her boots on the root-tangled earth had long since numbed her feet, but the pain was now migrating, a sharp throbbing ache that shot up her shins and settled in her hips. Fatigue was no longer a sensation, it was a physical presence, a dense, invisible barrier that pressed down on her shoulders, daring her to fall. Vera did not look at the barrier, she looked through it. Her helmet felt like a lead weight, and the sweat running into her eyes carried a stinging salt. Yet her pace was unwavering, her breathing a low, measured hiss that signaled absolute control. The jungle demanded a surrender to despair, but Vera offered only the cold, unyielding precision of military discipline. This march was not about movement, it was a psychological trial by attrition.
The body, Vera knew, was a magnificent liar. It shouted demands for rest, water, and cessation, employing the voice of instinct, which in combat was a path to failure. Her task was to ignore the biological imperative, to enforce the will of the intellect. She focused on her core strength, the center of gravity that allowed her to maintain her balance on the treacherous ground. Each step was a deliberate, conscious negotiation with gravity and exhaustion. She recalled the old field adage, "Discipline is merely the application of will to movement." She broke the entire ordeal down into the smallest possible units of survival. One more breath, one more swing of the arm, one more placement of the boot. The weight of her rifle was a familiar extension of her hand, a tool to be protected and respected. She felt the low hum of her team moving behind her, their fatigue mirroring her own, but their pace also holding firm. She was the anchor, her stamina was their benchmark. To waver was to fracture the resolve of the entire unit.
Vera shifted her focus from her own discomfort to the well-being of the 3 soldiers following her. Sergeant Pasternak, her point man, moved with a kind of weary grace, his silhouette an exemplar of field proficiency. Private Kvitka, the radio operator, occasionally stumbled but quickly recovered, driven by a deep-seated shame of failure. Command was the heaviest weight, far surpassing the gear. It was the awareness that her judgment, her choice of pace, her decision to stop or continue held the ultimate consequence for their lives. She could not afford the self-pity that the men perhaps could momentarily indulge. The essence of command is the steady, unblinking refusal to acknowledge an alternative to success. She imagined her fear and pain as sand, slowly trickling out of a small hole in the floor of her mind, acknowledged only long enough to be dismissed. Honor, in this environment, was not a medal on a uniform. It was the silent promise that she would not break before they did.
The main idea of this entire, agonizing movement solidified in her mind. The heaviest burden is not the gear, but the choice to carry on. Every muscle fiber, every exhausted cell in her body was screaming the logical, rational argument for a halt. But the choice to ignore that logic, that was the core of her strength. That choice was a constant internal act of rebellion against her own limitations. She deliberately tightened her grip on the rifle, channeling the pain in her hands into a focused tension, a reminder that she was still capable of action. The true test of a soldier is not the moment of impact, but the hours of sustained suffering that preceded. Anyone can react, only the disciplined can endure. She watched the jungle floor, searching for signs, for tracks, for anything that would justify the immense personal cost of this march. The mission objective was still hours away, an intangible goal, but the step in front of her was immediate and real.
A sudden, sharp cramp seized her left calf,
a searing, immobilizing spasm that threatened to buckle her knee. It was a purely physical betrayal, a system overload. Her body wanted to drop, to rub the muscle, to cry out the pain. Vera did none of these things. Her training, the cold, brutal conditioning of endless forced marches, activated. She forced her heel down, shifted her weight, and pushed off the ball of her foot, overriding the spasm with a focused application of strain. Her pace did not break, did not even slow perceptibly. The pain was registered as data, not as a command. Tolerate. Do not react. This was the profound detachment that separated the warrior from the civilian, the ability to treat one's own physical shell as an unreliable but necessary piece of equipment. She remembered the words of her drill instructor, ringing with new, stark truth. Your body is a tool, Lieutenant. Do not let the tool tell the craftsman how to work.
The humidity was a tangible weight, pressing the air out of her lungs. The insects were a constant, irritating chorus, a minor psychological torture that threatened to chip away at her focus. Vera focused her attention on the sound of the rain cover rubbing against the waterproof fabric of her pack, the low, steady ch-ch that became the rhythm of her survival. She forced herself to take measured, shallow sips from her canteen, rationing the precious water. Thirst was a luxury she had to manage, not eliminate. To drink deeply now would mean risking dehydration hours later. Military discipline is the triumph of foresight over immediate relief. She scanned the canopy above, the perpetual gloom of the jungle offering no comfort, only constant concealment. The fear of ambush was a cold, high-frequency signal in the back of her mind, kept muted by the relentless focus on the tactical present, the sightlines, the sound perimeter, the position of her men.
She allowed herself a moment for an internal articulation, a profound quote that she repeated like a silent prayer, anchoring her fragmented consciousness. The first battlefield is the mind. Win there, and the enemy is already defeated. This was the fight. The hidden enemy was not the opposing force that might be waiting in the shadows. It was the corrosive voice of surrender, the internal traitor that whispered sweet promises of rest. Vera closed her mind to that voice, sealing the breach with a mental wall of iron duty. She had committed to this path, and the commitment was absolute. She thought of the history of her unit, the line of soldiers who had stood or marched in far worse conditions. Her endurance was a continuation of that heritage, a silent act of loyalty to the professional ethos.
The concept of honor simplified under the weight of the pack. It wasn't about public acclaim or grand narratives. It was the concrete promise of reliability. Vera's honor was currently expressed through her unflagging gait and the clarity of her next decision. She sensed the rising anxiety in Kvitka, who had stumbled again. She needed to reinforce the collective spirit without breaking the restrained silence of the march. She didn't turn around. She didn't call out. Instead, she slightly increased her pace for 10 strides, then just as subtly returned to the original rhythm. The momentary increase was a silent, powerful communication. I am not slowing down. Find your strength and match me. The message was received. Kvitka's breathing immediately became more controlled, his steps firmer. Leadership was often a subtle nudge, not a shouted command.
Suddenly, Pasternak, the lead man, froze. A sharp, almost imperceptible hand signal. Ambush? Fatigue? Vera stopped instantly, the transition from motion to absolute stillness fluid and immediate. The entire patrol ceased to exist, dissolving into the foliage, becoming part of the jungle's shadow. Vera's heart rate spiked, not from panic, but from the sudden injection of adrenaline that sharpened her awareness. Pasternak slowly raised 2 fingers, 2 figures ahead. Vera crawled forward, her rifle already leveled, her mind cycling through engagement protocols. Her body, despite the 24 hours of punishment, felt strangely light, energized by the threat. Fear, when channeled by discipline, becomes a fuel, not a brake. She saw them, 2 enemy scouts, moving carelessly, confident in the depth of the jungle.
Vera did not hesitate. Her command was a breathy whisper into the comms. Pasternak, left. Kvitka, right. Silent elimination. Wait for my signal. The movement was executed with flawless, brutal efficiency. The fatigue vanished, replaced by the white-hot focus of the execution phase. Vera felt the satisfying, heavy silence of the neutralized threat a moment later. 2 threats eliminated. No noise, no trace. They moved immediately, crossing the breach and securing the bodies, her hands working fast, retrieving intelligence and ensuring no further risk. The entire engagement took less than 90 seconds. There was no discussion, no congratulations. The mission had resumed its forward vector.
The quick, violent action had served as a paradoxical reset. The adrenaline temporarily masked the deep physical depletion. As they moved on, Vera recognized the profound truth of the journey. The enemy was not just the force they had just neutralized. The primary enemy was the distance, the heat, and the unrelenting internal suffering. The true test of their professional soldiering was not their ability to fight, but their ability to march to the fight, exhausted, dehydrated, and hurting. She forced her mind to focus on the small, manageable details, the angle of her foot, the count of her steps, she was counting in sequences of 100, the minute-by-minute progress. This deliberate confinement of attention was the only way to manage the crushing vastness of the task.
She thought about the thousands of hours spent in training camps, the repetitive drills, the senseless, agonizing physical demands. At the time, they felt like pointless cruelty. Now, she understood. Training was the practice of endurance, the forging of the automatic response. The military did not train them to be strong. It trained them to choose to be strong when they felt weak. The exhaustion, the pain, the fear, these were the triggers that training was designed to neutralize. True strength is not measured by what you can lift, but by what you can endure. The pain in her calves was now a familiar drone, a white noise against which her focus was perfectly audible.
The jungle began to thin, a sign that they were finally nearing the drop zone and the designated objective. The knowledge should have brought elation, but it only brought a fresh wave of clinical focus. The final kilometer was always the most dangerous, when the promise of rest invites carelessness. Vera spoke the second, profound quote internally, setting her jaw. Endurance is not waiting for the storm to pass, but learning to walk in the rain. She accepted the pain, the fatigue, the residual anxiety, not as obstacles to be overcome, but as the environment in which she had to operate. They were simply the condition of the march, the cost of the mission. She increased her pace by a fraction, pushing the pace hard for the final approach.
The final half hour was a blur of heightened senses and physical torment. Vera's mind was running on pure, refined willpower, the engine of her discipline burning the last remnants of her energy. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her breath was ragged, and she could feel the painful grinding of her joints with every step. Yet her weapon discipline was perfect, her eyes constantly scanning, her mind analyzing the tactical landscape. The mission's success now depended entirely on this final surge of resolve. She forced a final, deep, stabilizing breath, acknowledging the total physical cost and accepting it. This was the moment where the professional contract was paid in full.
Then, silence. Pasternak gave the signal. They had reached the objective, a designated ridge overlooking the valley, the crucial observation point. Vera knelt, settling into a firing position, her rifle ready. She did not immediately drop her pack or seek comfort. She scanned the horizon, established the perimeter, and confirmed the coordinates. Only then, with the tactical situation secured, did she allow her body the luxury of rest. She let the pack slide to the ground with a dull thump. The sudden absence of weight, a powerful, jarring relief. She looked at her men, their faces grim, exhausted, but holding a look of quiet, unyielding respect. They had carried on. They had chosen the hardest path and followed it through. Vera felt the overwhelming satisfaction of duty perfectly executed, a silent, profound honor earned in the depths of the jungle. The silent march was complete, the strength of the spirit affirmed.